Hello and welcome to my 10.2 Restoration Druid Damage Guide. Okay, so before I go into anything else, we got to get a couple core concepts down, okay? And the first thing I want to mention is healing versus damage, which is better? And the answer is, it depends. You have to use your brain here. Are people in your group dying? If no, then you should probably be doing more DPS. If they are dying, you should probably quit doing DPS and heal them back to, a healthy and stable value, okay? So, there's no one correct answer, and this is something that you'll have to feel out and get better with, okay? There's no one answer to, should I be doing more damage or should I be doing more healing? Am I in cat too much? Am I in my caster form too much? The answer is always yes, okay? It just is very dependent on the group and also what you feel comfortable with. So we're going to start off pretty slow. Okay, so there's that disclaimer. Healing versus damage, which is more important? And the answer is every single time, it depends on your group. It depends on you, how comfortable you are. And the third thing it's dependent on is how well your group is doing in terms of, are they kicking? Are they letting avoidable damage go through? Do they stand in things? There's so many reasons why there's not a simple answer to which is better, healing versus damage, okay? Remember, you are a healer. You are there to help smooth over any mistakes done by your group. Don't forget that. However, the cool thing about Restoration Druid is we have a huge potential to do lots and lots of damage. Okay, so the first ability that I want to introduce you to, and I'm going to kind of do two together and then separate them here, so bear with me here. Okay, so the first one is Moonfire, and what it is, it's just like Moonfire for any other Druid spec. It's a dot, and it's going to last 18 seconds. This is very important to understand, a dot. Okay, we're going to be talking about dots a lot today, okay? And then Sunfire. These two things I think of as in tandem with one another. Both of them feed off of each other well and interact well together. And if you are a brand new Resto Druid and you have zero idea of where to start in terms of how do I do any damage at all, I'm feeling overwhelmed, whatever that might be. Literally only watch this very first part and practice it and then come back later. Literally only 2 dots. Okay, this is only the very beginning, these 2 things. Okay, so now on to Sunfire. What it does, it's a dot, okay? It does initial damage, but then it, again, does extra damage over time, dot, over 18 seconds, to the primary target and all the other enemies within 8 yards. Awesome, so this is our first AoE dot. Okay. Okay, so back to Moonfire to start off. And this is something that I'm just going to show you here on the target dummy. It's very simple. I target an enemy, I press Moonfire. And it is just going to start taking damage every, couple seconds for, 6,000. What's cool about this, it doesn't have any cooldown. So what does that mean, Dottie? That means, well, if you're, say, fighting 2 enemies, you can use Moonfire twice. Awesome. Now, when this gets low, we refresh. And so, pretending that we're in a dungeon, right? We are now exercising just the very simple beginner R-Druid. We are maintaining uptime of Moonfire on both targets, and when those targets get into their pandemic window, we refresh Moonfire. A pandemic window is the concept that after a threshold amount, say, I'm making this up, but say 5 seconds, if we refresh Moonfire after, in that 5 seconds, that extra amount of time will be added to the new cast, okay? So and we will not lose any uptime of our dot. So as you can see here, it's 3 seconds, and now it's over, it was over 18. So those 3 seconds were added on to Moonfire. Okay, so this is for beginner R druids, this is the very first concept that you have to understand. The pandemic window, okay, and how it interacts with your dots and maintaining uptime. I took my hands off of the of my mouse, so I didn't recast that very well. Don't be like me, be better. Okay, so this is Moonfire. It's very simple, and we just aim to have 100% uptime on the targets that we are in combat with. It's as easy as it looks. Okay, continuing on with our very, very, very basics of our druid damage. So we've talked about Moonfire. Now, let's talk about Sunfire. Now, as you see, and as we touched on earlier, Sunfire is actually an AoE ability. And it's the exact same concept as Moonfire, except it will damage all targets within the radius. So I was able to hit both of these training dummies with Sunfire with only 1 button press. This scales. So if we're in combat with 8 and they're within the yard radius of a couple yard radius, then we will apply Sunfire to all targets in that area. This is super important, and beginner resto druids legitimately do not press these 2 introductory damage buttons. I'm not joking. Until you get to above a 20 key, you could probably do more DPS than 50% of all R druids if you literally, on every target, you made sure that you had Sunfire, and then you made sure that they had a Moonfire, and you just refreshed those. I'm not joking. The bar, the threshold is exceedingly low. So I'm putting this out there to do my best to help our druids. Let's change that narrative, right? Like, we want to make sure that our druids are big pumpers when people think about this in their mind. Okay, so again, let's recap. We're in combat with these 2 target dummies. Now, Sunfire, Moonfire. And I'm using mouse over macros here, which is why I can just scroll over them and do damage. Okay, so our Sunfire's getting low. Moonfire once, Moonfire twice. And we are doing quite a bit of damage with only Sunfire and Moonfire. We're going to refresh these again. I cannot emphasize this enough. If you just press these 2 buttons, you will do more damage than you think you will. And I can't even, it's sad, but a lot of our druids that I've seen do not even press both of these buttons, and if they do, it's hardly ever. If you watch my own gameplay, one of the very first things that I always do is apply at least Sunfire, and I will go through and Moonfire if I'm not already into Catweaving, which we will touch on here in a minute. Okay, the next ability, if you're a beginner, that you should work on implementing, and this will be a button then you later will not use, okay? So here's kind of the caveat, right? Good for a beginner, not good for when you get some experience and you feel more and more comfortable, okay? And that's going to be Wrath. So Wrath is just a spammable ability, it has a low mana cost that just does nature damage to your target, and that looks like just simply this. This is basically it. Now, you can, again for a beginner, so we apply our dots, and then we Wrath. And this is the beginner Resto Druid DPS rotation right here. Now, there is much, much, much better buttons to be pressing. before I get into Catweaving, there's going to be one more button that I'm going to introduce you to, which is Starfire. And the point in which you would want to use this, I believe it's around 8 to 9 plus targets. So how I always use Starfire is I shift into Boomy and use Starfire. Again, this will only be done in polls that have very high target counts, okay? So kind of put a caveat in this. This is one of the more advanced things about Resto Druid DPS, okay? But I did want to at least introduce it to you. Okay, so now that we've gone through the caster abilities and a little bit of the beginner, like the very, very, very beginner aspects of doing damage as a Resto Druid, let's talk about some of the harder aspects, some of the more fine, refined, the gentleman aspects of playing a Restoration Druid and doing damage. And that is going to be your Catweaving. Okay, so what does Catweaving mean? So that means weaving in between your healing and your damage. You're going to be doing damage in cat form, like a feral druid. Now, why do we want to do this? Number one, because it makes us, in healer terms, gigapumpers. And when we run the correct gear and the right trinkets, we can, on boss fights, say, that don't require a lot of healing, we can easily beat the tank in damage. Now, this is different for AoE pulls. However, you can be a very, very respectable damage dealer as a Resto Druid, okay? This is part of the skill cap that good players will notice that you are different. They will look up at the damage meter in Everbloom when you're pulling Lashers and be like, oh my goodness, my Resto Druid just pulled 200k DPS on this pull. How in the world did that happen? Well, skill, number one. And part of that is being able to shift in and out of cat form, knowing when to, when not to, and also meeting all of your healing checks while you're doing so. Now, how do we do this? Well, we have to plan. We have to know the encounters. But the first thing that we have to get comfortable with, and again, this is a beginner's guide, so please don't think I'm insulting you here, but I see far, far, far too many. The best way to shift into cat form, like any other druid form, is what? Yes, if you said it, a keybind. If you do not have your shifting onto keybinds, you should not watch any of the rest of the video. You should hop into WoW right now and figure out what keybinds that you have available to switch to use as your keybinds to change forms. If you do not do anything else in this video, it's because I assume that you just logged into WoW right now and started keybinding your druid forms. I don't care that if this is hard. If you're very serious about wanting to do more damage and improve your ability in Mythic Plus and also stand out from your peers, you absolutely have to have your buttons keybound. I don't care how hard it is. Keybind your forms. Every single one of them. Okay. Now that we got that awkward thing out of the way, the next thing is another keybind that I'm going to introduce to you. And that is what I call what is called, not what I call, a Cancelform Macro. And a Cancelform Macro is exactly as it sounds. And it is just, you can give it any icon that you want. Call it Cancelform. And it's just /Cancelform. Now, what does this do? What a Cancelform Macro does is when you are in any shapeshift form, it will, off the GCD, shift you out, which means that it saves an entire global cooldown. This is incredibly important. Again, I want you to pause the video, go into WoW, and legitimately you need to go and make a Cancelform macro and then find a keybind that you're comfortable with and add it to your bars. Do not continue without this thing done. Okay, so the first ability that we're going to be talking about in regards to Catweaving is Shred. And this is very simple. It does single target physical damage to whatever target, and it will award 1 combo point per use. Okay, the second ability that we're going to look at is going to be Rake, and what this does is it very similar. It builds a combo point. However, with Rake, it actually does its damage over time. So it's a bleed effect that we put on. After we built up a certain number of combo points, and the number of combo points will change depending on the situation, okay, we're either going to choose to use Rip, which is a bleed that does damage over time, or we're going to use Ferocious Bite, which is a finisher that does damage based on the number of combo points. Okay, that is the 4 main and basic Catweaving abilities, and we're going to go into each one separately now. Shred is very, very simple, and it's basically a spammable single target damage ability, and we're just going to be building that up and then consuming those combo points that we generate very simply. Now, what things maybe should we generate into? Well, say that this training dummy is a boss fight, and doing DPS as a Resto Druid is really about maintaining your dots, okay? That's what this display here is on my screen. It's showing me, it's glowing all the ones that are not applied, okay? So let's go ahead and apply one. So now we have Rip, and so our target is bleeding for damage over another 16 seconds, so let's go ahead and start. Because Rip is applied, I go ahead and bite once again, okay? Now I need to reapply Rip. It's applied. I keep using Shred into a Ferocious Bite. This is like the general way that you're going to use Shred. The next ability that we want to practice using and make sure that when we get into any combat, necessarily almost any situation, that we maintain uptime of this dot, and that is Rake. Okay, so the first thing about Rake is anytime that we can come from cat stealth and apply it, we should. So that's what I just did here. The reason why is this will stun whatever target, in addition to doing more damage because it's coming from stealth, okay? So, say after we come out of stealth, so we're not in stealth, we're just auto-attacking, we see that it does not, this target dummy currently does not have the effect applied, so let's go ahead and apply it. We've generated a combo point. Okay, so let's Shred. Shred. Okay, well now we have 5 combo points, so let's Rip. And then refresh our Rake. Shred, 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 Shred. Bite. I ignored my combo points there, but you get the point. So it's about to come off again. We Once again, rake, rip to apply again, and then we shred, 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 shred. So now we're maintaining uptime of both rip and rake, and our damage has increased by quite a bit with just this general understanding, okay? So, kind of to recap, we're talking about rake. If we can, we always want to re-stealth. We almost always want to open with rake for the stun. Apply our rip. And start building combo points via shred. And then spending them with a spender. Okay, so let's talk about rip. And the first thing that you absolutely have to understand about rip is that it is a finishing move, okay, that uses the combo points that you build up. It is very different from Ferocious Bite, okay? Because the damage that the bleed causes is not changed by how many combo points that you use. It's really the duration of that bleed, okay? So having a 5 combo point bleed doesn't make it 20% more powerful than a 4 combo point bleed. It just means that it lasts 4 more seconds. This is super important to understand about rip, because that means, okay, if rip is going to be our biggest spender, our biggest spending damage ability, okay, that means that we need to be knowing this going into every pull, and perhaps not using rip at 5 combo points. Maybe we rip at 3 combo points, 2 combo points, 1 combo point. It depends, okay? The value of rip depends on how long the enemy that we are fighting will live. So in a boss fight, say Blackroot Cold or Razan, you can very often get full combo point rips, and you know that, hey, I'm going to be able to stay in cat form for the next 15 seconds, so I can go ahead and plan out a max combo point rip. This is really, really great value. However, in AoE pulls, in trash pulls, I might be deciding, hey, I'm going to rip on 2 combo points. I'm going to be ripping at 3 combo points, depending on the number of targets, and then 2, how long I think each one of those targets is going to live. You should not be, 5 combo point ripping on anything that's not going to live the full 24 seconds, or at least not live long enough that you shouldn't just be spending those combo points on a bite, okay? So, remember, we're thinking about our rip damage in terms of time, and that is highly dependent on how long something is going to live, right? So, we pull up, we open with our rake, and we apply our rip. Okay, so the 1 combo point, it's only going to last 8 seconds, okay? It's going to do 122k in my current gear. That's quite a bit of damage. Okay. What does a 1 point Ferocious Bite do? 24k. Yikes. Okay. So, we can see the power of rip, okay? So, let's see. Let's build up a combo point. Let's go 2 combo points. 2 combo points. 2 combo points. Now we can keep these up, right? On each one of these targets, which is going to be doing more damage than a single rip on 1 target. Because assuming that this is just a trash pull, depending on the target, some of these are going to live way, way less time than other mobs. So, that's another concept that we have to think about with our rip damage, is the idea that not all damage is made equal, okay? There's priority targets in every pull. In a boss fight, the priority is usually pretty obvious. It's almost always the boss. Ding, 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 unless if there's ads that have a particular mechanic, okay? But that's totally different discussion. But again, let's say in this pack of 3 training dummies, this middle one is like a caster that has 3 times more HP than everything else. So, okay, how should we open? Well, let's open with our Rake. Maybe we stun it. So maybe we prevent some cast. And maybe we actually load up on a 5 combo point rip before switching off to the others and then low combo point ripping them. Okay, because then we want to come back, reapply our Rake, and keep doing priority damage, okay? Priority damage as a Resto Druid, you can make a very big impact on killing important mobs that need to die quickly. Part of that is experience, knowing which, what's the most dangerous thing, but then also what thing can we kill in this pack to prevent the most damage in the future. So another example, say Throne of the Tides, well, what if you could get, 30k more DPS on a Sentinel that, casts the Healing Absorb? Well, perhaps you might just be enough damage as the healer to make it not recast, which means you've saved in high key levels, literally millions of healing needed because you're focusing the correct target, okay? So remember, when you're going through and deciding, hey, how should we prioritize the target, or how many combo points should we rip at? Well, it depends. That comes with experience, but then also knowing who the priority target is in a poll and what you can do to help your group get through it. Okay, so rip. Let's recap just a little bit. Remember, the number of combo points that you rip, okay, changes the length of time that the dot will do, not the strength of the dot. Super important. 2, it is better to use our long combo point rips. As a general rule, okay, as a general rule, there's always like exceptions. But as a general rule, it's better to use our longer combo point rips on priority damage targets. However, if there are none, then you can focus on spreading 2 to 3 combo point rips, depending on how long the estimated length of time each mob is going to live in combat, okay? So again, we go through, we always open. In stealth, we always open with a Rake, ideally. And we want to apply a rip to the priority target, and then go ahead and then switch to ripping and raking other targets. This is how we're going to start building up our DPS overall. So after that we've applied our rip to a mob, which is here, well, what do we do in the interim time? Assuming we have all of our other bleeds applied. Let's just pretend, okay? Well, this is where we would Ferocious Bite. Quite a bit of damage there on a crit. So what you're going to do is in between the times that your bleeds are already applied and you have, rip going, you are going to big Ferocious Bite. It's pretty simple. Remember, Resto Druid DPS is really mainly to do with your dots and having them applied as often and keeping them up and maximizing, uptime as close to 100% as you can throughout the duration of the fight. Any extra time that you have and any extra spending that you aren't spending on applying your rips, you should be Ferocious Biting. It's very, very simple in that way. This is your button to fill the downtimes when you already have your other dots applied. So the last two abilities that I want to talk about are Thrash and Swipe. And I'm putting a disclaimer on both of these because you're not going to be running them all the time. But for the sake of this video, this is what I was messing around with. This is just a disgusting abomination of a talent tree. Normally, if you were focused on catweaving, you would have Heart of the Wild spec, but for the purposes of this video, that's kind of beyond the scope. It's an introductory guide to catweaving, but dependent on your talent choices here, okay, you're going to be taking perhaps Thrash and Swipe. Now, both of these are the amount of times that you would use them and the viability of use are really dependent on target count, okay? And in the case of Thrash, not only target count, but how long those targets will live, okay? So for example, Thrash currently, for me, does about 4,600 damage initially, with around 20k later, over 15 seconds. Well, thinking about this, right, I could just shred for 62k damage. So depending on how many targets that I'm going to be fighting and how long they're going to live will be dependent on whether I choose to shred, simply shred, or to apply a Thrash. Thrash has to meet a certain target count, and depending on your talents and if you even are running Thrash will depend on that target count. Now the second one is Swipe, and it is the same deal as shred, okay? Swipe all nearby enemies, inflicting around 18k damage, deals reduced damage beyond 5 targets, okay? So odds are, just based on napkin math, okay, I'm gonna be having to hit basically all 5 targets for that to really be worth the single target. You know, I could just be doing priority damage to one single target that I want to die quickly in a pull, okay? So I don't want to give you too many hard rules and thoughts on both Swipe and Thrash because they're more dependent than the others. However, with the bleed, assuming that a target's going to live long enough, applying just all of your bleeds and all of your dots is actually going to be a good strategy, in my opinion, for catweaving, because there will be times that you have to shift, okay, out, and having a Thrash applied to a target and still ticking for damage, even if you are in your caster form, might actually be a good plan. So depending on target count and, you know, how efficiently and how often you need to switch back and forth is going to be dependent on, you know, how often you should apply Thrash, but then also how often you should use Swipe. For general beginners, it's kind of better, especially, okay, if you don't go improve Swipe here, to basically don't even have that on your bar, because almost always shred will be better. In single target, you should never ever press Swipe, like never. Even with the 100% buff, you shouldn't be pressing Swipe on anything but the exact correct target counts, okay? I don't want to give you any hard rules because that kind of depends on your gear. There's too many small factors there to really say which is going to be better, but I thought I would at least mention that these are two buttons that you will have, and under the right circumstances, they can be powerful and useful, but you have to think about things in terms of target count and then also how long something's going to live. Okay, so now that I've kind of gone over all of the different, you know, abilities that a Resto Druid has for damage, what does it look like to kind of put these together? And let's talk about them as it's happening and kind of how to put each one of these different abilities together. Okay, so we're going to practice putting all of these different concepts of applying our dots to use here on just a single target. And the goal for this little section here at the end is going to be, I want to try to have 100% uptime of all of my dots. So Rip, Rake, Sunfire, Moonfire, and Thrash on this target and see how well we can do. And then weave in bites when we have everything, when we have our Rip applied, okay? So let's open it up. So now we have like 19 seconds here. We should be able to get a 5 combo point Rip. Then we'll shift, reapply our Sunfire, Moonfire, bite, Rip, Thrash, build. I maybe should have extended there. That probably would have been the better idea. It's okay, we don't lose too much uptime there. And that's basically what catweaving looks like. Now, the only other things that you will keep in mind is that your trinket choices, along with some other cooldowns, for example, Convoke and Heart of the Wild, will impact your ability to do DPS. I will cover those things later, but as an introductory beginner's guide to, from zero, how in the world do I catweave at all? That last little bit kind of displays how you could go about thinking how to incorporate each ability into the whole. And so for beginners, I would say that this is a pretty good representation of like what that progression could look like for you. And the real exciting skill expression comes down to being able to use Convoke, being able to have DPS trinkets and time those correctly, being able to maintain uptime of your bleeds on multiple targets instead of just one, doing prio damage. There's so many things that you'll build up to and build upon. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you guys learned something. If you guys enjoyed it and you felt like you gained some value, if you haven't already subscribed, I would love it. In fact, if I have earned that. If you have any comments, any questions, please leave them down below. I'll do my best to answer them. I don't always get to every single one of them, but I try to as much as I can. Thank you very, very, very much, and I will talk to you guys later.